Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. It is the middle of Passover, Tuesday, the 11th of April, and today we are going to be studying Psalm 11. The 11th Psalm goes back to the short Psalms that we had been looking at before, and the last couple were much longer, but we're back to a shorter Psalm, so we can really spend some time reading some of the different translations and seeing how people struggle with the daunting task of translating the Hebrew. Usually we spend some time in this class on how the psalm is used liturgically, that is, in our prayers. And I could not find a single connection of this psalm to our prayer service. There was one place where a commentary referred to something that the psalm, like a phrase from the psalm, as maybe referring to something in the book of Esther, and then it like popped up as maybe connected to Purim. But when I researched it, it seemed like that wasn't actually a connection from this psalm. It felt like it was some other psalm that had been misreferenced over here. So anyway, no connections to the Jewish liturgical canon. So that means that we can spend more of our time dealing with the psalm as a poem itself, and how it makes us feel and what it does for us. So I'm looking forward to that. And we'll begin, as we usually do, with reading the psalm out loud in Hebrew and then in some translations. So, Psalm 11. La menatzeach leDavid, Badonai chasiti, ech tomru lenafshi, nodi harchem tzipor. Ki hine harishaim yidrechun keshet, honenu chitzam al yeter, lirot b'mo ofel lishrei lev. Ki hashatot yeharesun tzadik ma pa'al. Adonai behechal kodsho, Adonai bashamayim kiso, einav yechezu, afapav yivchanu b'nei adam. Adonai tzadik yivchan v'rasha, ve'ohev chamas san'a nafsho. Yamter al rishaim pachim eish, v'gofrit v'ruach zilafot minat kosam. Ki tzadik Adonai, tzedakot ahev, yashar yechezu fanemo. Would somebody like to volunteer to read the translation on the left-hand side of page 2, the JPS, Jewish Publication Society translation?
I do.
All right, Alba, go ahead.
For the leader of David, in the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, take to the hills like a bird? For see, the wicked bend the bow. They've set their arrow on the string to shoot from the shadows to the upright, at the upright. When the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous man do? The Lord is in his holy palace. The Lord, his throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his gaze searches mankind. The Lord seeks out the righteous man, but loathes the wicked one who loves injustice. He will rain down upon the wicked blazing coal and sulfur. A scorching wind shall be their lot. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face.
All right, and let's read one more translation. How about the translation on the right-hand side of page 4 from the Evangelical Bible Commentary, James Hamilton Jr.? Would somebody like to read? All right, Henry, you just have to unmute. Yeah.
For the preeminent one, of David and Yahweh I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flutter to your mountain, O bird? For behold, the wicked treat the bow. They ready their arrow, the bow. They ready their arrow on the string to shoot in the dark at the upright of the heart. When the foundations are thrown down, what can the righteous one do? Yahweh, in the heavens in this throne, his eyes see, his eyelids test the sons of Adam. Yahweh will test the righteous and the wicked, and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. He will cause snares to rain on the wicked, fire and brimstone, and scorching wind, the portion of their cup. For Yahweh is righteous. Righteous deeds he loves. The upright will see his face.
All right. So what does this psalm make you feel? What immediately jumps out at you?
Don't do bad things.
All right. Yeah. There's definitely a sense of separation between the righteous and the wicked, as we've seen in many of the Psalms. Yeah.
It's more positive than the others have been.
Good. Yeah. So right, the last few Psalms that we've looked at together have had kind of have been kind of downers in terms of their sense of, the wicked do whatever they want and God does nothing. Right? The wicked behave with impunity. The wicked are lying in wait like lions, right? Like that was the sense of the last few Psalms. And in this Psalm, there's a more upbeat tone to it in some sense.
Yes.
Yeah, Larry.
Rabbi, I see this more as a summary of the last Psalm, which 9 and 10 will assume really, as you say, is one Psalm. And that one, if you think of the beginning of that Psalm, it's the wicked have been taken care of. The righteous are in heaven with Shemayim, with God. All is well. And it's both past all these troubles and yet also ahead. There's sort of a timelessness to it. And then when you move into the 10 part, it's all the wicked and why has God forsaken us? And it's clear that David is speaking from a position where it's already done. And the question is a rhetorical one. God has done this. He answers it he was testing us. And this is God's plan, is to work this out and let it happen. But don't worry, because you see, eternity is not something that starts in the future. It's already here, and God has done this. And here we see something similar. God's eyes see, he's testing the righteous and the wicked. The wicked make their plans. These things will happen, but God will deal with it. So it seems to be a short summary of the longer exposition, that timelessness of the wicked have already in the future, which is now as well as the present, been punished. And the righteous are experiencing their reward. And that's why the Lord appears to be not taking action.
Nice. Nice. Does anybody have a response to what Larry? Yeah, Gary.
I didn't have a real response. I had just another thought, but I'll
Okay.
defer.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Beginning in verse 3 and out down to the end, my reaction was that this just sounded like a description of doomsday, the judgment, and the afterlife. The foundations are thrown down. God is judging everyone, and the righteous will, get a chance to see God's face.
Yeah, certainly this idea of brimstone and scorching wind sort of gives us that sort of sense of the the end times. Yeah. I do wonder if the focus on the end times that this psalm has is part of why it doesn't appear in Jewish liturgy, which, the Jewish liturgical canon is much less focused on end times and much more focused on sort of living in the world that we are in. Linda.
I noticed in the very beginning, I mean, I only read the first two, the Jewish one and the Christian one, but it's when everybody else is saying violence, but for the Jewish one, it seems like it was that it was set in a different way. What is it, 6? I have to keep moving my little thing from place to place because it gets in the way. The little thing of all our pictures. Is this ours? Can you go down? Is this the first one?
Jewish Publication Society?
Okay, this is the first one. Okay, so 6. He loathes the wicked one who loves injustice. So that's different, right, than violence. All the others are violence. They all translated who love violence, who love violence. Injustice, it's not the same to me. I mean, in a way it is, but it's a different emphasis.
Great. So let's look at that. The Hebrew is Hamas. Okay. Hamas means violence. The JPS translation translates Hamas here as injustice. Which is not a terrible translation. I think about other places where the word Hamas is used. One that pops into mind is Sodom and Gomorrah, and right in it. Another is in the time of Noah, and the world has become Hamas. The world has become a place of, and there it's often translated as lawlessness. Hamas, it means violence, but it also means sort of the kind of attitude where a person ignores the law, right? Which could be understood also as injustice. So in our translations, we have violence, injustice. Here in Robert Alter translates it as havoc. Havoc. The Rabbi Richard Levy translates it as violence. So does James Hamilton. The Koren Talem translates it as violence. So many of them translate it as violence. Yeah. Okay. So mostly people are translating it as violence because Hamas does mean violence, but I do think that it means violence with a connection to the idea of lawlessness or injustice. That's a great point. What is it about wickedness that God really hates? Is it the impulse to violence? Is it some aspect of that violence, such as injustice? Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Linda.
Yeah.
Well, if following God's law is shalom and is harmony, then to not follow the law, to violate it, is not just havoc, but is violence. It's the opposite of shalom, peacefulness and wholeness and integrity and harmony.
Great. So Larry says it's not like the word Hamas is the opposite of shalom. Yep. And so the opposite of peace is like flying in the face of everything that is a sense of wholeness. And so both lawlessness and violence and injustice all work to translate that sense of that sense of rupture, of breaking God's sense of peace. Nice. All right, I'd like to look at the first verse. I did get an email that said it might not be of interest to everybody, but I'm really curious about the grammar of this first verse. Okay. We'll look at it in Hebrew first. Lamanatseach leDavid, that's our superscription. Okay, Badonai chasiti ech tomru lenafshi. So the Pirik Yud here at the end is the first person, and then the person is talking. How can you say to me? And nefesh means soul or person, but in the Psalms, when it says linafshi, it just means to me. It's a fancy way of referring to the psalmist's self. How can you say to me, Nodi harchem tzipor? Nodi is singular. Tzipor is one bird, right? Harchem is your mountain, but your plural. What is the plural mountain doing there? And this is a very hard to translate phrase, because the tenses do seem to be all mixed up. So when I was studying this psalm to prepare, I did prepare a section on translating verse 1. So Rashi translates it. How then can you say to me, flee like a bird to your mountain? Right? And that is understood to be that the enemy is expelling us, or the enemies are expelling us from our rightful place and demanding that we fly like birds to a distant mountain. Okay, so there, to your flee like a bird to your mountain is you plural the righteous people, right? So it's the righteous people are both being referred to as a singular bird and also collectively owning the mountain, but the mountain is far away. Okay, the Radak translates it as, how then can you tell me to flee like a bird from your mountain, right? That the enemy is expelling us from the mountain, asserting that it's his, right? So there, the mountain belongs to the enemy. Rabbi Yechiel Hillel of Yabrov translates it this way: how dare you tell me that I must flee because my mountain is but a bird? How dare you tell me that the refuge that I thought to be as secure as a mountain is in reality no more than a bird in flight? Should I abandon my sense of security and trust? So Rabbi Yechiel Hillel is trying to understand the juxtaposition of this word mountain with the word bird. How can you tell me that I'm on a bird mountain, a mountain bird? How can you tell me that this mountain is, that I thought was a mountain, is as flighty as a bird? So each of these approaches work in the context of the psalm, right? It is not clear from reading the rest of the psalm whether the plural is referring to plural innocent people, like plural righteous people, or whether it's referring to plural or whether it's referring to plural wicked people. It's not clear at all what that means. And when you read the psalm, it could be either or any of them. And so each of these approaches of whether we're flying away from the mountain or toward the refuge of the mountain, or whether we're on the refuge of the mountain, but then we find out that indeed the refuge of the mountain is not a refuge at all. Each of these happens to us in life itself. Each of these is a true telling of how life can be, right? Sometimes we flee to shelter, sometimes we flee from shelter. Worst of all is when we thought that a place was sheltering and then it turns out to be illusory. Like if you're healthy and young and then all of a sudden you have cancer, or all of a sudden you have a degenerative illness that's going to kill your sight and your walking, right? The things that are such a sense of security for us, like functioning bodies. When they don't function, we have this feeling of complete betrayal, and anxiety, of vulnerability, of the way in which our sense of security and trust has been completely undone. And so we a deep dive into this verse, this first verse, gives us many different possible ways of connecting to this psalm. So I just wanted to pause here and say, what do you think of this? Like, is there one that you gravitate toward? Is there an experience that you have had of this seeking refuge? How might you think about using this psalm in that kind of a context? Mishka, I saw your hand.
Just changing position. No thought yet.
All right, Larry.
When I was a young boy, growing up as a young Jewish kid in a very non-Jewish environment north of Boston, I was called a Christ killer. And my sense of that, I then asked around, began to understand, is it in a sense could refer to both the past usurpations of Judaism and the present usurpations, where it's claimed that Judaism, by the Crusaders and by so many Christians today, is over. That it doesn't. You stop claiming Adonai is yours; he's ours, and you just don't understand him. It's the replacement theory that the old emperors, Nebuchadnezzar and the others, asserted when they invaded the Holy Mountain, and even today, when people are anti-Semitic, saying that Judaism is an enemy of God, as opposed to the seat, the soul, the root of God among humans. So it was very personal to me, and I see it happening today. And I think it's that same prophetic attitude that's in the psalm.
Thank you. Does anyone else, in reading that first verse, have a sense of whether you are the bird, whether you're fleeing to or from the mountain, where you find refuge, whether you have this experience of seeing the place that you thought was refuge turn out to be not as stable as you thought it was? Gary?
I'm reading all three of those. They all seem right to me. But I had a question. Who is the you that's saying this? How can you say to me?
I think, yeah, I think the speaker of the psalm is a member of the group of the righteous. How can you,
Not the enemy.
Yeah, how can you, the enemy, or how can you, God, or how can you, circumstances of my life, how can you say to me, right? How can you say to me, escape, right? There's such pathos, I think. Badonai chasiti, I have taken refuge in God. I I thought God, I thought that I was safe in this moment. How can you now turn to me and say, run away from your mountain stronghold?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Escape to the mountains like a bird, take to the hills like a bird. A lot of our translations are following Rashi. Yeah, that's Rashi's interpretation. But as we saw, Radak really sees it in a different way, and Rabbi Yechiel, I think, is the closest to what the Hebrew actually says. No di harchem tzipor. Your mountain is a bird. That's what it seems to be saying, which makes it weak. Yeah. So let's look at the translation, the Hasidic Chabad translation here, which adds in so many other words. That's page 6. So as we've talked about, as we've discussed, Rabbi Yosef Marcus thinks that the way to do a good translation is to fill in all the missing words. For the conductor by David, I have placed my trust in God, and therefore will be saved by him from the hands of those who hunt me. How then can you, my enemies, and there it's clear, it's clear who the you is. How then can you, my enemies, say of my soul and your mountain, i.e., king, that it wanders helplessly like a bird? So, how can you say of my soul, your mountain, that it wanders? Okay, for behold, the wicked, not sure what this is. Pulling this out. Oop. Okay. Checking. All right. All right, so it says, but for behold, the wicked, Doeg and the others who aim to sow hatred between Saul and David. So Doeg is a character in the book of Shmuel, Samuel. For behold, the wicked, Doeg and others who aimed to sow hatred between Saul and David, bend the bow. They have readied their arrow upon the bowstring to shoot in darkness at the upright of heart, at the priests of Nob, by intimating to Saul that David was hiding among them. They destroyed the foundations of the world, the saintly priests who were murdered by Saul's men for harboring David. What wrong has the righteous one David done? God is in his holy sanctuary. God's throne is in heaven, yet his eyes behold and his pupils probe the deeds of people. Do not rejoice over my suffering, since the reason I have been made to flee from Saul is because God tests the righteous for their ultimate benefit. But he hates the wicked and the lover of violence, even if he does not punish them immediately. Ultimately, though, he will rain down upon the wicked fiery coals and brimstone. A scorching wind will be their allotted portion. For God is righteous. He loves the person of righteous deeds. The upright will behold his countenance. So, for this translation, for this translator, this psalm is the next in this series of historical psalms that speak to moments in David's life, and the enemies that surround are the physical enemies of Saul and specifically the wicked people who are trying to to interfere in this relationship between David and Saul. How does that, Murray?
I think while the psalm has let's say, a specific reference in history, in the evolution of humankind and relations between God and humans, it really represents a much broader effect in the continuing life that we struggle with between the protector and the protected, between the humble and the powerful, and the reliance on one or the other. It doesn't always work out the way we are praying or hoping to, but we continue because our faith and hope is that it will eventually come to be. I mean, we have examples of every kind, not necessarily including the Holocaust period, but in any period where the protector has let's say, impressed upon the protected that the protected will be safe and secure, and in the course of events, it doesn't turn out to be that way. It's let me tell you, today in the Wall Street Journal, there is an article by Walter Russell Mead about Ukraine giving up the nuclear weapons to Russia. They wanted to keep it as a safety, a security against the expansionist Russia. But our Department of State, President Clinton and President Obama, persuaded them, saying, rely on the world rule, the world order of rule, rule of order, that you will be protected. And therefore, give it up, you return it. Well, it didn't turn out to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the smallest of ways, in the smallest of ways in our daily life, we sometimes hope and pray, and some of it happens, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think it means that God tests the righteous?
He strengthens our faith by giving us trials.
Okay. Yeah. Bree?
That's pretty much what I was going to say, that our faith is always tested, and it is how we overcome these tests that God judges us.
Yeah. Do you, in your life, when you experience suffering or trials, do you see them as tests? Do you see yourself as the righteous protagonist in the story, and God is testing you?
Not me personally, because I don't consider myself being very righteous, but I try. I try to be righteous. Maybe that's what the test is, to see how hard we try to be righteous.
That's a good point.
Now that I'm 85 years old, I can look back when I was a child of 50 or so, and understand that those trials were to strengthen my soul. It didn't seem it at the time. All I felt was the trouble. but
Didn't
over
seem it
time,
at the time.
you realize that you've been strengthened by it.
It's hard to notice in the moment that what you're going through is a growth experience. After the fact, you can look back and say, yeah, that was I grew from that. I became a better person as a result of that. I made a good choice there, and I made a bad choice there, and I learned from that too. But in the moment where you're making choices, it's hard to see that as a test.
And I think tests are designed not just to evaluate, but to strengthen. Think of them as pop quizzes during your life.
Sure. Or another way that the word test is used is in that sense of like a blacksmith to test the blade is to strengthen it too. Yeah. James, Reverend, were you gonna say something?
Oh, well, I'm toying with the whole idea of God giving us tests. And I'm thinking about Abraham and Isaac. And I've always had a very hard time with that. So there's a part of me that doesn't want God to be giving us tests. And then there's another part that says, yeah, but I need it. So I go back and forth.
Okay,
When the foundations are undermined, what can the righteous man do? Right? Like the psalmist asks, yeah, I mean, look, when it turns out that your mountain was just a bird, that's the foundations, the stronghold, your sense of faith. When that seems to crumble away, what can you do? You can only try to renew that sense of faith that, yeah, it's gonna turn out okay. And Gary.
I just want to comment. First, I also agree that I have trouble with the idea of God testing. But I was just looking at the Hebrew, and the Hebrew word is Yehazu. Am I getting that right? For testing?
In
verse.
Yeah. No, it's Adonai Tzadik Yivchan. God.
No, but in verse 4 at the end, it's Yehazu. Isn't that what we're talking about by testing?
No. So verse 4 says Einav Yechazu Afapav Yivchanu. So the word Yivchanu, Afapav Yivchanu B'nei Adam. Yivchanu is the word for test. Yechazu means to look. Yechazu means to see. So his eyes behold. Okay, his eyes behold. Or his eyes watch. That's the word Yechazu. Like Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah. That's the same word as Yechazu. Afapav meaning God's brow, God's forehead, or it's a poetic way to also discuss God's eyes. God's eyes, Yivchanu b'nei Adam, that means to test or to examine. So here it says God's gaze examines everyone. God's gaze searches mankind. Here God's look probes the sons of man. And then here this translation, Robert Alter's translation, uses the same word, probe, to be the word for test. The Lord probes the righteous. His eyelids try is another word for examine or test. And then here examines. In Hebrew, it's the same word. You're absolutely right. Afapav yivchanu from the word bochen, meaning exam or test. and then Adonai Tzadik Yivchan, God tests the righteous. And so the same word is used at the end of verse 4 and at the beginning of verse 5. We were talking about the beginning of verse 5. The Lord tests the righteous. Here in JPS, it just says the Lord seeks out the righteous, which is a very different way to understand it. Not to test, but to seek out. Does that explain the Hebrew, Gary?
Yes, that was, I get it. Sorry, it's my mistake.
No apology necessary. Yeah, this word is the same, Yifan. Yeah, Larry.
Rabbi, the Psalms often double the statement to not just emphasize, but to give a different perspective on the same action.
Yeah, that's right. And as a translator of the Psalm, you have to decide, am I going to translate this with a, like, say it uses the same Hebrew word, am I going to translate it the same way twice, or am I going to use a synonym to try to emphasize the way that you're saying it twice? That, like, it's like a slightly different emphasis by changing to use, you know, if I write try in one place and then examine in the next place, you get both senses of that Hebrew word. And, you know, I as a student, I think that it's hard for people who are trying to learn Hebrew to see that the same word is translated in multiple different ways, even within the same psalm. That's a struggle. That's a struggle to try to figure out, okay, but what does the Hebrew word actually mean? You know? But
the struggle is the struggle is part of the meaning.
That's right. That's right.
But you get the sense that God's looking and sees, that he sees in the same way that one observes, and at the same time he's seeing with a greater depth into the heart, that which is not visible in the ordinary sense. So in that sense, he sees what you do, but he also assesses and evaluates. And the two things going on: the trial, the observation, the examination. It's that struggle, I think, is part of what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Murray.
I just want to raise the question, why only the righteous are being tested? Shouldn't every human being be tested? And especially if the Lord awaits the return of the wicked and wants to encourage about it. And so it should expand to all of us.
Yeah. And certainly here, Yivchanu b'nei Adam, all people are being tested in verse 4. And then in verse 5, it's not clear at all whether God is here. According to Robert Alter, God is testing the righteous and the wicked, but hating the Ohev Hamas, the one who loves violence. Whereas a lot of other translations say God is testing the righteous. How God tests the righteous is through the actions of the wicked and the lovers of violence, right? Like the wicked people are part of how God is testing. So I did bring a sense of the spiritual applications of this psalm from Richard Levy, and he writes, when life closes in around us, sometimes we too long to take flight above it and escape to the mountains steadfast of our fantasy. Because they love us, our friends and family sometimes encourage our sense that we need to escape and agree that the foundations of our life perhaps of their lives too, are tottering. When misfortune attacks us or those we love, we often feel that God has abandoned us. But as the poet understands suffering as a trial, an event in which we shall uncover new knowledge about ourselves or the world, so can we. Those of us outside the legal profession usually fear trials, certain that somehow we will lose our case or be embarrassed or humiliated. But when the judge is God, the poet urges us to believe that suffering is the way in which just and righteous people are purified, another sense of the word trial, a way to reveal their own virtues to them and to others. Thus, when we feel tried, we need to resist the temptation to flee. Instead, we should say, I know I am to learn and perhaps to teach something by this. I need to stay. As Moshe stayed beside the fire attacking the bush, learning that it did not consume the bush, but was an invitation by God to take on a holy mission. As God takes in, becomes deeply aware of our humanity in trying times, so with faith can we take in God's divinity. The psalm in verse 5 suggests two ways of handling the issue of the seeming success of the wicked. First, to see it as a test of the righteous, to strengthen the worthy person's resistance to the attractions of material success. And second, to know that the wicked, successful or not, are despised by God, a condition meriting not our jealousy, but our empathy. If only she knew how God hates her actions, how unhappy she would be. We can see God's hatred, though the wicked cannot. And we try to imagine how painful it will be when the wicked person becomes privy to God's feelings.
Good.
What do you think? Linda, did you have any thoughts?
It's hard because I don't think it's a foreign way of thinking to me.
What if?
I mean, I ask God for strength to get through things. Sorry,
What is a foreign way of thinking?
Rabbi? I think he froze.
I froze.
No.
I didn't freeze. What is a foreign way of thinking?
I ask God for strength to get through things. I don't think of God as judging me, or I don't think of it that way. So I have trouble with, I mean, it's just a different way of conceiving the relationship. Does that make sense for me?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. For you, God is a source of strength. God is the source of that stronghold. God, that you do not experience the suffering as also from God.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of people do ask, how could this happen? Why is God doing this to me? Mishka, what are your thoughts?
Well, coming from the point of view of not having any firm understanding or decisions about God and God's existence, I was looking at this particular line here, a condition not meriting not our jealousy, but our empathy. That part of our being righteous is to also be empathic, even in the point of being threatened or endangered. That's part of who we need to be. And this is a teaching about the fact that our well, putting it into modern terms, are being so totally in such a totally divisive state that we need to go past just how we feel, but to look to the other and say, I want to be I can't think of the right word, but I want to understand your point of view and not just see you as totally wicked. And that, and in the way that God might draw distinctions that are between the righteous and the wicked, that also that, you know, one is not necessarily always one or the other. That there are times when you're both at the same time.
Nice.
Meandering thoughts.
Edith, what are you
Congratulations.
thinking?
I'm having a very hard time wrapping my mind around this whole thing. It's a whole different way of thinking than what I'm used to. So,
Yeah.
really no thoughts at this point.
So I just want to raise up, I want to acknowledge that this psalm is in some ways out of step with general or dominant Jewish theological understandings. Not completely out of step, but enough out of step that it isn't in any of our liturgy, right? And which is not to say that we can't learn from it and that it can't be really spiritually meaningful, right? And that there might not be times in our life where it makes sense to read this psalm and to focus on that sense of being shaken to the foundations, right? And the fact that we're struggling with this psalm is not surprising to me. The psalms that we know well tend to be psalms that fit more neatly into the theological frameworks in which we usually experience the world. And so, right, this psalm is a challenge in that way. I think that the experience of studying it together with you has opened that, and there's a reason that this one isn't in our service.
There's another interesting interpretation that you can understand from the Lord tries the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. It's as if when the Lord has probed, he knows this person is, or for whatever is a wicked person and there's no redemption, a Haman. He doesn't have to try him. He doesn't need trials. He's judged himself. The righteous, though, is redeemable. Let us strengthen the righteous person's faith and make it stronger and stronger. But there's no need to bother with the wicked.
Right. And then we could say most folks are not the wicked. Most folks are in some middle ground. Maybe not righteous, as Bree said, but definitely trying to see themselves as doing the right things, struggling with that. And I definitely think that there's a way in which, we have to struggle to see ourselves as being as learning from the suffering that we have, as growing from it. Yeah, Linda.
Isn't there always tshuva? I mean, I can't imagine just a person who's doing evil things feeling like there's no way out of that.
Yeah, right. That's what I was saying is I think there are very few people who are truly irredeemably wicked. And certainly I would not presume to judge somebody in being that. Perhaps God knows if a person is irredeemable, but I I agree with you that we have to assume of everybody else that we encounter, even those who are wicked, even those who behave with wicked actions, that they too are struggling and can be redeemed, right? We have to interact with the world in that way. But perhaps God can know, yes, this person is irredeemable. I don't know. Maybe there's nobody who's irredeemable, but certainly the psalmist believed that there were some people who were irredeemably wicked. And when I look in the world and I see folks who are behaving in certain kinds of ways, it is hard not to see like true wickedness and wonder, are these people completely irredeemable?
It's not for us to say.
Well, that's what
right.
I could not presume.
Right.
But I relate.
It's hard to love your enemy.
Yeah, I relate to the psalmist's frustration with the continued existence of wickedness. But why do people behave in such a way? Yeah, I like the psalmist struggle with that. So let's close out with I'm gonna do a reading from Psalm Songs by Gaia Aronoff Bernstein. It's not a translation. It's a poem that she wrote that is based on the psalm, but like an interpretive. It's her own interpretation of the psalm. It's not a translation. Not trying to be a translation. All right. 11. In God I trust. Don't tell me to take wing and fly away to safety. What's safety when arrows can pierce my heart in flight? In God I trust to smash the evil missiles aimed at me and mine under cover of night. In God I trust in God, wherever he sits in celestial glory, infinitely distant, infinitely intimate, to know my thoughts, to hear my pulse race. I trust you, God, to rescue me, demolish all who seek to harm, rain sulfur on them, hellfire storms. I trust you, God, to notice me, to know my love, to keep me safe. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll meet again next week. Next week, we will do Psalm 12.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Have a good rest of Pesach for those who celebrate Pesach. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Mhm.
Pancakes.